press play. He's the voice of the intersection of marketing, tech, and popular culture. Thinking is his commodity. DJ, data punk, stylish sock collector, and author of the book Disruptive Marketing. Jeffrey Colon is your host of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
If it's Friday, it's another episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, this week broadcasting live from the city of Hamburg, Germany, where I am speaking at the M2C conference, which is one of the older marketing conferences in all of Europe. And, of course, recording live means that I'm using or utilizing the Spreaker iOS application, which I really love. And I would definitely check it out if you are a podcaster yourself. So on this week's episode, we are talking about why digital marketing is the new traditional marketing because of so many different departmental changes in the ecosystem out there in terms of what marketers are required to do. The other thing to note is how titles like social media manager don't mean as much anymore because there's so many of them everywhere. We're also going to talk about cost cutting in Silicon Valley. And this is a very interesting movement to watch because the glory days of unlimited capital lent by venture capitalist organizations is going away. That doesn't mean that capital isn't in abundance, but it looks like companies that are loaning money are asking for a lot more tracking on their investments. So the startup world is going through its own form of, hey, show us the return on investment in terms of the money we're giving you to fund your operation. And finally, we'll take a look at blockchain and why you as a marketer need to understand how it works and why cryptocurrencies are so important to the future of peer-to-peer database technology for managing and recording transactions with no central bank or clearinghouse involvement. All that and more on episode 46 of Disruptive FM. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. We're at Disruptive FM. Or if you don't want to follow our channel but want to participate in the conversation and make sure that we're paying attention to your comments, questions, concerns, and points of view, make sure you use hashtag DisruptiveFM. So digital marketing doesn't mean anything anymore. The name actually sounds antiquated as we move more toward 2016. And a lot of it is because marketing involves so much nowadays. It is no longer about being a good email marketer, a good social media marketer, a good digital marketer. Most of that really is irrelevant. And the reason why it's irrelevant is because we've really moved into a more customer-centric and customer-obsessed world. And it's important to note that we've moved into this area because we should ultimately be focused on experience marketing. Everything is interrelated in how the customer is experiencing our brand or what we're offering to the world. And this is a big topic of what I get into in my upcoming book, Disruptive Marketing, What Growth Hackers data punks and other hybrid thinkers can teach us about navigating the new normal. Experience marketing leaves the channel behind and focuses solely on the user and their unique experience. This is why you're hearing terms like post-digital pop up and become more popular than ever. Because it doesn't matter what channels you use anymore. It matters how you connect with the customer based on how they want to connect with you. And that might be through text messaging, or it might even be through snail mail or direct mail. Again, it depends on who your audience is and how they interact with the world. So understanding them is the most important starting place for us in marketing. And understanding them means understanding people, not technology, not platforms, not analytics. Yes, those are all important in terms of measuring and quantifying your marketing, but that is not the root of what is going to inspire people. They're not worried about your Marketo analytics or Salesforce analytics or what you're doing in Power BI with Microsoft. That's for you to understand on the back end as a marketer. But where you really need to start is, what do people feel inspired about? What are they passionate about? And where do they experience things? What channels can you reach them on? So marketers, again, need to refocus on how they can orchestrate a seamless interaction from device to device and experience to experience, because it ultimately ensures a cohesive marketing experience that feels real. And that's what ultimately is missing when so many things are planned. Let's plan a strategy, and the strategy is going to work like this from A to Z. There's no agility in that type of planning. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't plan, but how are we using the experiences like customers would use them? If we think that customers are going to use a platform like Snapchat because we took in a course on how people are using it, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. All of these channels evolve over time, and ultimately, people are digital nomads. They will move from one platform to the next in a matter of seconds based on what makes them, what provides them utility or purpose. This is why we've seen some networks actually fall by the wayside over time, because people aren't getting value out of them. And there could be a variety of reasons why. So, with access to more tools and platforms than ever before, marketers need to ultimately understand the context of why people use those platforms and channels, and not necessarily understand how those platforms and channels work. We are simply marketers now in a digital world rather than digital marketers. So ultimately, we are also moving away from the digital expert, the digital marketing expert tag. Because are we really experts in a world where we are constantly going to have to learn, unlearn, and relearn? Highly doubtful. Again, curious for your feedback on this topic. Make sure you tweet to us at Disruptive FM, or tweet to me directly at DJ Jeffy. That's DJGEOFFE. Or you can follow me direct on LinkedIn using my first name and last name. When you search for me, that's Jeffrey with a G, the British phonetic spelling, and last name Colon, the Spanish phonetic spelling for my surname. So a big thing happened this past week, or I should say last week, as we record this in the early month of May. Dropbox, which is a startup, of course, in Silicon Valley, has started to cost cut because it ultimately wants to show investors that its business is strong enough to IPO. It is not a public company yet. And the public market has been pretty brutal this year to tech companies. There's only one tech company that actually went public this year, which is absurdly low for the industry. And investors are really looking for profitability now. Startups that maybe have burned through a lot of cash, or they might be struggling to go public, they may be told by their investors, hey, hold off, because we don't have a good PR story or a narrative if you basically are not worth much of anything at all. So what we are basically looking at now is, where does this world, how will it operate? Because you are going to have to cut costs at many of these startup companies, and much of that will probably come in the form of perks, because those are non-essential items if we look at a profit loss sheet. Or they could cut T&E, or they could cut a marketing budget, which is interesting because, again, the emphasis is going to be on product, but then many times when they ship the product, they don't have people who can actually frame the story in terms of how that will work from a user-centric model. So again, not learning from the Da Vinci model of pulling two worlds together, the hybrid world of design and marketing experience, into one of development. So this is an interesting thing to watch moving forward, because a lot of these companies might suffer with not being able to actually pay their initial investment back based on the fact that they have not been able to IPO. Because that's ultimately what many companies are set up to do. They get investment, they grow over time and continue to get Series C, B, and A funding. I should say A, B, C, and D funding. And then ultimately those investors are looking to be paid back, so the company floats into an IPO. They have a large amount of cash reserves that come in. They're able to pay back their initial investors, and then they basically sail where they are not beholden to anyone but shareholders, which of course poses its own problems. But what could basically be happening now, and the bigger problem for all startups, is that they might not be able to retain all their employees for a couple of reasons. One is they might shed some of those employees if they feel they can't IPO this year based on some of their estimates. The other thing could be from the cutbacks on perks. Those employees grow frustrated and they decide to leave and start their own startups, or join more established startups that may not be IPOing for quite a bit of time but have sort of a steady growth plan. Or they join established firms like a Facebook or a Google or an Apple or a Tesla or a Microsoft, based on getting better benefits and stock liquidity. And if that happens, of course, many in the startup world will blame venture capitalists when they really should blame themselves. They should look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, we actually haven't kept track of where we've put our investment, and we've burned through a lot of cash and we haven't shown any results. A lot of these startups actually think they're recession-proof, or that they have an unlimited timetable. And we're, of course, realizing that that is not the case in the business world. We don't have unlimited timetables, and of course, how this applies to the world of marketing is we have a number of timetables ourselves as marketers. When do we pull the plug on ongoing models that might not be working anymore? Or campaigns that are just falling flat? Or where do we invest in areas where we may have suffered tech deficit? Do we have the right platforms and programs for tracking what we're trying to do? Do we have the right team in place to handle that work? Do we have the right culture that can help inspire customers? All things to look at. It'll be interesting. Do I think a bubble is bursting? No. Do I think there is going to be realignment based on how things have operated for the last decade or so, since 2006, when we first started to see a lot of tech startups IPOing and going public? Yes. Usually these things happen in cycles. One of the areas, of course, to watch is you are going to, I think, see a lot of consolidation within the marketing tech and advertising tech landscape. Because there's no way that the 4,000 plus companies that fit into the marketing tech landscape can all stay private for long periods of time. So what we will see is many of those companies who might have similar offerings consolidating together and then possibly going public. Some companies might just fold outright because they won't have enough cash left from their initial funding, and they won't have anyone to save them because there's an abundant supply of these companies, and they aren't radically different from the other companies that exist. They haven't differentiated themselves in terms of their offerings, their culture, their value system. This is why it's so important when we talk about marketing, and specifically disruptive marketing, to align ourselves with 4 functions that marketing has not been known for. Listening, figuring out where what customers are desiring or what they need. Having a value system that aligns with customers or potential customers. Being able to unlearn and relearn things quickly and having a curious mind. All very important to have critical thinking skills in this day and age. That, again, we were probably told from many over the years, hey, that's of no value. That will really mean nothing in the business world. It's better to learn all these skills, because if you have skills, then you can apply them. And we're now realizing that having critical thinking skills is more important than any hard skills. Hard skills can always be relearned. Soft skills, critical thinking, lateral thinking, not so much. So something that we'll have to definitely watch over the next couple of weeks. And we'll have to continue to dedicate maybe a future episode to this topic. Because as we know, things go through peaks and valleys in the world of business. But this could be interesting in terms of also the geographical landscape in places like Silicon Valley and San Francisco, which are overpriced to begin with, and stock loaded with a lot of talent, but that talent might need to go elsewhere if there is a drying up or not a need for specific resources because companies pull back or belt tighten, so to speak. So the final topic I wanted to talk about in this particular episode, and I've really been enjoying my time here in Germany. I wanted to let you know, it's a wonderful city, Hamburg. Been to Germany many times, been to Munich and Frankfurt and Berlin. Way back in the day, back in the late 90s when I worked for a German company, spent a lot of time over in Germany. And Hamburg is really interesting because it's a very digital savvy city. Everything seems to be wired and connected. And I got into a really good conversation with someone about blockchain and cryptocurrencies And it inspired me, of course, in the moment to dedicate a portion of time to talking about blockchain and why it's important. I remember talking about cryptocurrencies in a strategy deck that I prepared for Gray, the agency Gray, back in 2011. They had a bank known as Ally Bank, which is based out of Detroit. It has no retail branches. They wanted to know more about what they could take advantage of in the world of banking. And it's probably one of my favorite strategy decks. It's actually on my SlideShare account if you want to check it out. I'm at slideshare.net/Jeffrey Cologne. And I talk a lot about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And because of cryptocurrencies, we now have a technical a technology, I should say, that allows cryptocurrencies to function, and that's called blockchain. It is originally the formal name of the tracking database underlying the digital currency Bitcoin. The term, of course, is now used more broadly to refer to any distributed electronic ledger that uses software algorithms to record transactions with reliability and anonymity. And this technology is also sometimes referred to as distributed ledgers. That's the more generic name. Cryptocurrencies, the electronic currencies that first engendered it. Bitcoin, which of course is the most prominent of those cryptocurrencies. And decentralized verification, the key differentiating attribute of this type of system. So at its most basic, blockchain is this self-sustaining peer-to-peer database technology that allows us to manage and record transactions with no central bank or clearinghouse involvement. Of course, this is the reason why the federal government has been fascinated with Bitcoin, because it ultimately could be the main disruptor of the Federal Reserve System. I think it's quite interesting that it's so easy for many of us to talk about, Uber disrupted the cab industry, and Airbnb disrupted the hotel industry, and Spotify disrupted the iTunes platform or sort of music industry, which had been disrupted prior by iTunes and Napster. These are all things that are related to either entertainment or leisure. But then you get into things like, hey, Bitcoin could maybe replace the Federal Reserve System, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? That'll never go away. And of course, it's like, yes, these things could go away. You could have alternative currency, and it could ultimately remove a centralized banking system. Of course, it requires a lot of people to adopt a cryptocurrency, which we haven't seen take off except in specific segments of society, like the developers community. And there's been a lot of companies interested in blockchain. HP, IBM, Intel, Microsoft are just a few. And the big thing about blockchain, besides no central bank involvement, is it is handled through algorithms and consensus among multiple computers. And this system is obviously presumed immune from tampering, fraud, or political control. There is no Federal Reserve chairman saying, hey, by the way, we're going to raise rates. Everything becomes algorithmic because it's ultimately designed to protect against domination of the network by any single computer or group of computers. And of course, participants within these currencies are anonymous, or maybe only identified by pseudonyms, so that you can rely on transactions in terms of at least knowing that there is a false name associated with the transaction. And because every core transaction is processed just once in one shared electronic ledger, blockchain reduces the redundancy and delays that exist in today's banking system. So again, how do you remove all the middle people from transactions? This is why blockchain technology is so interesting. So, of course, I should also note that, look, banks aren't fearing cryptocurrencies either. Many of them are also interested in what's happening. Citibank, Bank of America, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, you name it. They're also interested in this area as well. They're trying to experiment with it. NASDAQ is experimenting with it as well. So if more experiments continue, blockchain ultimately could become a game-changing disruption for any venue where trading occurs, where people need protection from identity theft. This includes things like public elections, healthcare, where you're trying to keep records anonymous, but also available to doctors or managed service providers, retail, and all forms of financial services. Blockchain could ultimately transform many companies' approaches to trading, back office operations, and capital assets management. So we have a huge area now that if blockchain transforms transactions in the same degree that we've seen disruption along leisure industries or even the mobile payment industry, or even through something like a global positioning system, GPS, where data is accessible through a common electronic platform to everyone. I mean, you're going to have just massive shift in how specific companies within our economy operate. And even though there's intense potential here, there's a lot of uncertainty as well. That always happens, of course. Some groups, I should say, consulting firms think that cryptocurrencies basically won't ever take off. It'll be a niche industry. But I think in terms of what we have to look at from a marketing standpoint is we literally could have these entire forms of trade between each other in terms of how maybe mobile payments occur between people radically changing, because you could actually open up an entire sort of black market with people. And that could get quite interesting and quite ugly, to say the least. Because it might be hard for the government to actually track money exchanging hands, and thus it becomes harder to tax you for that money. I've always told people, if you really want to learn about the world, read a lot of William Gibson novels. That's really where the world is moving or already has moved. So it'll be fascinating, I think, to see if decentralized digital currencies do get more acceptance now because of the fact that blockchain technology is really becoming more mainstream. People really are interested in figuring out how to move over into an entire digital cash ecosystem. And again, you could even have cryptocurrencies that crop up that are just related to specific communities. Maybe only like 100 people use them, but they're using them in that barter ideology that I talk about so much. And much of that is based on your reputation, which is almost like the world operating like open source software. So as marketers, we might have to understand how these transactions can take place between our companies and what our customers are providing in terms of value. Maybe we are running an influencer program in the near future and we're giving people cryptocurrency in some form that they can use specifically for services that our brand provides. But this is a huge area that will ultimately have its biggest impact on the financial services industry in terms of digitizing assets, giving wider access to people who don't have bank accounts, better bookkeeping, and really just creating almost an alternative payment system that doesn't exist in the modern world right now. So again, would love your feedback on this. A huge area that, of course, is just starting to bubble on the fringe. And of course, like I like to say, you want to pay attention to the things that bubble because they ultimately may boil over. Hope you enjoyed episode 46 of this Disruptive FM podcast. I'll be back next week with some more news from the marketing world. We'll catch you then.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Jeffrey's latest book, Disruptive Marketing, on Kindle, hardcover and audio. Signing off from the city of Seattle. Press pause.